David Raab, the founder of the CDP Institute. It's really great to have you here, David.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So we have a really packed agenda. We'll shortly go through this, but make sure, I mean, it's really fine if you have any questions during the presentation. Feel free to ask any questions. Use the chat room to do that, and we'll try to pick up the questions as we go along. We will have a Q&A session at the end as well. So if you want to keep your questions until then, that's fine as well. And maybe if we don't have time to pick up on the questions during the presentation, we'll pick them up at the end of it. So don't worry, we'll get to your questions as we go along. All right. So the agenda today, a lot of stuff that we want to cover. So we'll try to keep the tempo up, so we keep the time, and we hopefully have some time to do some questions in the end. But before we actually get started, I thought it would be appropriate to just have a few words about Data Talks and a few words about the CDP Institute. So Data Talks, we are a leading customer data platform. We're based in Stockholm. And ultimately, what we do is that we help companies create an outstanding customer experience. And we work with a variety of customers, of course. Of course, we're a Nordic company, so we have customers here in the Nordics, but we also have customers in Europe and also in Asia. Now, one of the things that sort of is unique for us a little bit is that we are taking a industry approach to CDP. So we work with some different verticals, which is sports, retail, utilities, and banking. So those are the verticals, and that has actual real impact on our customer data platform as well, which means that we try to build functionality around the use cases that are typical in those verticals, and we try to sort of fulfill the needs the analytical needs that are there for those customers. But we'll get back to that a little bit later on. So that's a little bit about Data Talks. And David, would you like to say something maybe about the CDP Institute?
Happy to. My favorite topic. So the CDP Institute was founded in 2016, and our mission is to help marketers and really companies do a better job with their customer data, which often involves a customer data platform, but we're vendor neutral, and we really just want people to succeed in dealing with what is a very complicated problem. So we offer a great many services. If you go to cdpinstitute.org, I have to get that in there, with a library of papers and tools like a use case generator, an RFP generator, and all sorts of things just to help people to understand their customer data and how to succeed.
All right, thanks David for that. So before we actually get started, I thought it would be a good idea, because the thing is that when you do these webinars, it's sort of really hard to interact, and we know you're out there, but who are you? So maybe if you just could type in the chat to say like, hey, hi, I'm Chad, and wherever you are from. All right, that would just be fantastic, just to get a feeling of who's really watching this. All right, so we have some people from Stockholm. That's nice. All right, from India as well. All right, so there's a bunch of people from Europe, US, India, Stockholm. Fantastic, really nice, great, good crowd, different crowd, fantastic. Okay, so thanks for sharing. And I will be doing that occasionally throughout the presentation, just checking that you're still with us and that everything seems okay, and if there are any questions that come up. So don't worry, we'll catch those. Okay, so let's get started. So I want to start in this end. talking about actually this is the Data Talks tagline, so to speak. It's a better customer experience means better business. Now, not many people would actually dispute that. Most people do agree that these two are in some ways connected. And of course, when you talk about the customer experience, it's a very broad expression. It contains a lot of different things. It contains everything that has to do with your brand, of course. It has to do with the look and feel of your website, your product, and all of those things. So it's a very broad expression. But we still like it because if you talk about better, what is a better customer experience? Well, in our world, I mean, what we believe in is that even if you have a sort of a great customer experience from the way, in many aspects, like the look and feel of your website, for instance, or the look and feel of the communication you're doing, whether it's through emails or SMSs or any other channel you're using, we would say that the better customer experience is when the content within that is also more relevant. And then, so better in this case, we mean a relevant customer experience will mean better business. But then you have to ask yourself, so what does relevant actually mean? So going down that as sort of rabbit hole a little bit, you see that relevant also means personalized customer experience. And then you have to ask yourself, so what is a personalized customer experience? And that is something that actually appeals to you, which sort of implies that you have to know who's ever behind whoever is the recipient of whatever message you're trying to get across. So if you want to personalize something, you have to understand or know the customer you're trying to communicate with. And how do you do that? Well, like in any other relationship that you're trying to build, you have to know stuff about that person. You try to get to know them better. And that's where of course, where the data comes in. So a better customer experience means a more relevant customer experience. Personalizing it means that you have to know your customer. And for that, you definitely need the data. So that's what's behind the tagline. And if you get that straight, and if you sort of start working with that, we see in a lot of different cases, we see that actually amounts to better business. So definitely, this is a extremely interesting topic for many, and it contains a lot of stuff. So I would like to see, let's start off like just why should you be working with the customer data, and why is it important to sort of think about how you actually create a better customer experience? And one approach to it could be looking at the customer journey of today and sort of how you can handle that. And we all know that the customer journey is anything but a straight line, right? So, but still we have to try to make some sense of the customer journey. So we have different ways of sort of modeling the world, or sort of frameworks to sort of make some sense out of it. So we try to use this framework, and these frameworks are made up like the straight lines. I'm sure that most of you have heard of the Rion's framework for one, the reach, engage, activate, nurture, and close, right? And that's one way, that's one framework and one way of actually trying to make some sense out of the customer journey. And that's fine. I mean, you have to have a starting point somewhere. So we model it as a straight line, but we know that the customer journey is more like the crooked line on the right, which is fine. But then you have to understand that to be able to know where the customer is in that journey, of course, you need to have data around it, just for the sake of knowing what your customer is actually doing and what state they're in once they come back to you, or once they're engaging with you. So that's one aspect of that. You need data, and you need the customer data to understand this. But that's just one reason. There are so many other reasons. And one is that the competitive landscape has changed quite a lot over the last years. I don't know how long this has been going on, actually, to be honest. I've been working with data for the past 20 years, and a lot has changed during that time, for sure. Say 10 years with like big data issues. And I would say the reason why this is interesting is because the competitive landscape has changed quite a lot. Today, it's not possible to compete on the basis of price or product. It's certainly not, because you can be pretty sure. I mean, we think we have a pretty unique product, right? But there are other vendors out there. There are other CDP vendors out there, and there are also other vendors in the vicinity of what we're doing that also have products that sort of sound like ours. Which makes it, of course, really difficult to sort of try to just show the functions and features of a product and make that interesting enough for a customer to actually buy something from you. And I think it's the same way for most companies. So it's really hard just to get your product out there and shout about how good the functions and features are. So if that doesn't work for you, kind of switch the price. So if I can't shout out the functions and features, let me shout out about the price. I have a lower price than my competitor. But then you can be pretty sure that somewhere around the globe, there will be some other vendor that is actually willing to go a little bit lower than you. And then you have to go lower than them. And then you're in a race to zero, which I don't think really anybody wins. The customer doesn't win from that race either, I would say. So the competitive landscape has changed from the price product idea and into more of the customer experience. So you have to have a great customer experience. And once again, you have to sort of define what great is in this. And I would say, once again, we have to look at it needs to be relevant. You have to sort of be on the same terms as the customer you're trying to talk to, understanding their situation. And that's the same whether it's a B2C business or if it's a B2B business. You still have to be on the same terms as your customer, understand their needs and their pain points and what they're actually after. So that is probably a better way of working than trying to shout out that you have the lowest price or you have tons of functions and features. So the competitive landscape has definitely changed over the years. And another thing that has impact on that is that, and this I'm sure that all of you know this, that the power has shifted and that the customers definitely call the shots today. And most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Kotler's 4 Ps. At least I read about it when I studied marketing. Very central, right? But those, in some ways, are still, of course, very relevant, but they have also transformed. Just looking at the sake of, if we just take one of these P's, it's the price. Price is still, of course, one important part, but there's so much more interaction, right? Part of the customer journey or the customer experience, the price and the transaction that takes place when you actually give the price to the customer and you do the transaction to the service or the product or whatever, that's a very, very small part of the whole customer experience. So I would like to argue that it's more of an exchange, and a lot goes on before the actual transaction, and a lot goes on after the transaction. And there is also other things that you're sort of selling and buying during this time. So the exchange is like, if you want to start knowing your customer, you have to either make them willingly give you data in some ways, and then you have to give something back in exchange. And that can be, it can be that. So I sometimes have gated content, is because we want your email addresses or your phone numbers, and then we give you the gated content. But when it comes to the B2C, it's sort of other triggers, but it's still an exchange, and there's still like there's still a price for the sort of getting to know the customer. So the transaction and the price involved in that is just one small part. So that's important, I think, to sort of also realize that has changed quite a lot as well. So the competitive landscape has changed. We see that the power has shifted, and then we also have a fact that will actually impact your actual profit and loss report, and that's the fact that if we are able to give a better customer experience, and better in this case, we've defined it as relevant and personalized, customers will actually pay more, which of course is a very important fact to have with you when you talk about working with these topics, right? And the good part of it is that it's very few that customers or consumers that actually feel that their expectations are being met, and that's actually good news, because that means that you have to do pretty well, you don't have to do as much to get ahead of your competition, or at least to catch up with the competition. If the number was higher, you would have to do more, right? So In this sense, it's definitely it's never been a better time than actually to start working with this and start working with your data and how you can actually use data to create that more personalized and relevant customer experience. So we have the situation where the competitive landscape has changed. We see that we need to sort of realize the fact that it's not just Kotler's 4Ps. It's a much longer process. The customer experience goes over so much more. And then we have the last and maybe the most important reason why this is important, and that's because we have to realize the fact that all of our customers are emotional creatures, right? That's us as humans. And we also have Nobel Prize winners that have shown that we actually always make emotional decisions. And then we try to find the rational arguments to sort of show that decision was correct. And that, I think, is really an important fact. And that's why you can't just do with basing your analytics, for instance, on transactional data. You have to involve the behavioral part of the data in this, because you have to realize the fact that we are emotional creatures. So you have to get your customers emotionally involved. And once again, it's a good thing for your P&L reports, because if you're able to do that, understand your customers not just from a transactional point of view, but also from a behavioral point of view, you see that they are more likely to recommend your product, more likely to purchase from you multiple times, and also less price sensitive. So this is really, really important that we start working in this way. And of course, so let's say that we acknowledge the fact that we have a different landscape. We want to work in another way. Yes, we definitely need data to be working with our customer experience to make it as relevant, as personalized as possible. Great, fantastic. Then we come to the fact that then we have all of these touch points with our customers. Whether we want them or not, we do have them, right? They're both like the in real life shops that we have, and also all the digital touch points. And every single touch point represents data. So all of this is data, and some of it is like easy to use data, the transactional stuff, but a lot of it is the behavioral stuff. And that's important since we are emotional creatures. So it's imperative that we get a hold of it, but it also resides in all of these different touch points. So it's a little bit tricky to get hold of it. But we have to acknowledge the fact that customers, we have a lot of touch points, and all of them represent data that we want to be able to be more relevant and personalized. So then we sort of are challenged by this. And it is a challenging process for most brands. And of course, there are numerous different challenges, and I would just like to point out 3. So one of them is obvious. Since we do have all of these touch points with the customer, the data is scattered all over the place. That's one real challenge that we need to sort of look into. The other is that since we do have different touch points, it's so easy to start looking at the different conversions in the different touch points. Like, okay, so we're looking at the open rates of the email. So we're looking at the clicks or conversions on the website. So we get stuck with that, and we don't see the full picture. We don't see the full customer journey. We don't measure it on different aspects. So we're sort of lost in different, let's say, rabbit holes. And even if we try to sort of get through that and try to fix that, it takes some time to do it. So once we get those reports that will actually show us the big picture, they're probably outdated. And not only outdated, even if they're not outdated, they're actually up to date. It's not really possible to act on them, because they only show you the sort of the current state, and you can't go from that and do some actions from the insights you've seen. And that is actually one of the trigger points that actually started Data Talks, is that we were building a lot of big data customer insight solutions and delivering, I would say, fantastic insights, right? And then we were getting the question from the customer saying, okay, so what now? What do I do now? I've realized a lot of stuff, so what do I do with this? And we couldn't really say, that was a problem, or at least a challenge. And that's why I think the concept of the customer data platform is so fantastic, because it sort of puts a lot of things and systems we've been working with in the past, puts them together in one place, and makes it possible for us to actually act on these insights. And we'll get back to that later on. Which brings us to what a customer data platform actually is. It's trying to take care of all of these challenges and sort of make it possible for us to get into this different landscape that we have, and try to create these emotionally engaged customers, because that means that we need to collect the data. And that, as we just saw, it's scattered all over the place from all of these touch points, from the internal systems that you have. And then we, of course, need to, there are several different analytical needs that we need to sort of address. One being that we need to visualize it in some way, but then there are other stuff. And then the third thing, which is, of course, really important, is that we need to take it from these insights to actually action, and making all of this data that we put together, making it accessible to other systems, processes, and people, and making it possible for actually marketeers to work with their data hands-on, and not necessarily being skilled in coding or something like that. So that's the basis of how we see the customer data platform. So, question for you: does it make sense so far? It would be great if you could just type yes or no, and if you say no, then okay, then we'll go back again. Okay, at least one yes. Thanks for that. All right. Fantastic. All right, so I would say it's a majority of yes. So I feel obliged to continue. All right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the basics of the customer data platform. We've sort of we're trying to see the problem we're trying to address, right? And we've seen that it involves three major things: collecting, analyzing the data, and acting on it. So let's dive into it a little bit more. So this is the CDP Institute, how they define it, and David will talk more about this, but I just wanted to use this because it shows in another way what a CDP is. So what it's supposed to do is that it's a package software that creates a persistent unified customer database. Okay, so this might sound like a lot of mumbo jumbo, so let's look into it. What is it actually? What is a persistent unified? That means that we want to be able to, for every customer that you have on an individual level, we want to be able to attach all the different data points to that single person, right? And not only do we want to do it once, but we want to keep on doing it, and we want to be able to do that so we actually also can track what has happened. So we want to keep the history of that, because we want to be able to go back, see what's happened and how the customers have actually evolved during time, because if we can understand history, we can also predict the future, right? So it needs to be persistent, and it needs to be on a individual level. We always have to be able to go back to the individual level, because if we can't do that, we can't really act on the data. As soon as you start aggregating the data, you sort of ruin the data set, because then it's not possible to trace it back to the actual individual and act on it. That's one important thing. And the next important thing, which is really, really crucial, is that it's supposed to be accessible to other systems, meaning that one of the priorities of a CDP is that it not only collects the data, because there are many systems that can actually do that, but it also makes it possible to redistribute. So it's possible for other systems to sort of get the data back, more enhanced data set. It can be data that's been added to each individual. And not only systems, but also make it accessible to people, make it possible for a marketeer to actually work with the data. So this, I would say that this definition is really crucial. And this is one thing that you should actually be looking at if you're into looking at a CDP, that you can actually do this with the platforms that you're looking at. And this is basically what it does. It starts creating a profile depending on what the customers or the person is actually doing when they're engaging with you. So it collects both if you subscribe to the newsletter, if you watch a video, or you actually purchase something, all of that is collected onto the customer profile, and not only once, but it's doing it over and over again, so it's possible to trace back in history. And then once we have a fair amount of data, we can also start predicting what actually will be happening, and be a lot more proactive when we also talk to our customers, which means that we will be even more relevant. And then we have the challenge of the data stored in silos. And if we remember that all the touch points that we had, they are the different silos. So this is one of the things that we have to sort of try to solve. And not only the touch points are the silos, but also your internal systems have data that is interesting to put onto the customer profile. And those are silos itself. So we need to sort of come to terms with that. And that's why one part of a CDP is the collection part. And if you ever hear a tech company like ours, we like to talk about data ingestion. Now, data ingestion is breaking down silos. That's pretty much what it is. Of course, it's a very complicated engineering task, and it involves a lot of coding, but what it actually does, and the purpose of it, is to break down those silos. And that's one important thing. So we can start putting together all of this data, stitching it together, being possible to follow the user over the different platforms, the different devices that the customer is using. So that is one part in getting all of that data in there and breaking down these silos, putting it all together, and then of course making sure that the data also goes back out into the different touch points that we have. And when we're talking about the data goes out, it means that we're actually using that data to be more relevant in the communication that we're having with the customer, no matter what channel that we're using. So now we come into the different types of the CDPs. So this, I'm actually leaving this over to David to give us a little bit of insight of the different types of the CDP.
Certainly happy to. So we at the CDP Institute focus on the definition that Stefan just described to you. So and you'll notice that that definition really just talks about assembling the customer data. It doesn't talk about the other functionalities of doing analytics or doing activation. It's not that they're not important. It's just that in our view is not the core thing that makes the CDP different from other systems, because there are actually a lot of analysis systems and a lot of activation systems. So when we talk about CDPs, we say, well, a CDP must do that, must build those customer profiles, must assemble the data. And if that's all that a CDP does, we cleverly call that a data CDP. And there are quite a few vendors who simply focus on the data assembly bit. But people need those other functions. And some CDP vendors have said, well, we're more than happy to meet more than one need. So there are CDP vendors who have built systems that assemble the data and do, say, the analytics, predictive modeling, machine learning, AI, other kinds of analytics like visualization. There's quite a variety, actually. So those are, again, cleverly called analytics CDPs, and they still do the data assembly, but they do the data assembly plus the analytics. Then there are vendors who say, well, you know what? We know that our customers really want to select messages to send to their client, or select how they're going to treat their customers, which we will call campaigns, although it's not really the best term. So those are campaign CDPs. They do the data, they do the analytics, they do the message selection or the campaign management or the real-time interaction, call it what you will. And then there are some that actually take it a step further and don't merely select the campaign messages, but actually deliver the campaign messages So they have an email component, or they have a website personalization component, or they have a messaging component. So, and then again, not spending a lot of energy on naming things, we call those delivery CDPs. So all of those, again, are going to build the data. That's what makes it a CDP. But then the scope of the system depends really on what the buyer needs. If the buyer wants all those in a single system, they can find a CDP to do that. If they simply want something to build the data because they already have great analytics tools and they don't want to change out their campaigning tools, they can just buy a data CDP. So the point here is that anything that we would consider a CDP is going to do the data bits, but then there are some vendors who have substantially more. And as it says there at the bottom, DataTalks itself would include the analytics, so they would be an analytics CDP.
Thanks. And maybe you can also spend some time on the criterias because there like some do get the certification of being a real CDP, and maybe you can explain a little bit about that checklist.
Absolutely. So real CDP, which is trademark incidentally, is a program that we put together about a year and a half ago now, because there were simply so many vendors calling themselves CDPs that people were extremely confused. Now they're still confused. We didn't really solve the problem, but we at least want to be able to say from our own perspective, well, what really do people need in a CDP to get the things that we think people want out of a CDP? We believe, our hypothesis was that people have a certain expectation of what a CDP will enable them to do, certain problems it will solve. And we say, okay, well, what does a CDP need to do to solve those problems? Because if we have vendors who call themselves CDPs who don't solve those problems, then that makes CDP look bad. And again, the CDP Institute has to worry about CDP being a meaningful and useful term for people. So we say, okay, we really think about it. To do what we want a CDP to do, it has to take data from any source, not just some sources. But we think that people expect the CDP to build a truly unified customer profile with data from every source. So it's not just the transactions, it's the web behaviors, it's the CRM data, it's the advertising responses, it's whatever data, the social media comments, whatever data you want to put into the CDP should be able to do that, which doesn't mean that you put all your data into the CDP. It simply means that you decide, and it's not the CDP that says, you can't do that. The CDP simply says, well, whatever you want, we'll do it. Now you have to still decide what to do, what makes sense for you. So the second criteria that we have is that it can capture and retain the full detail. No summarization. Stefan already talked about not summarizing your data, aggregating it, and losing your customer details. But even within the customer details, you want the actual specifics, because you never know what you're going to need. You want to know the details of that web visit, not just, oh yes, they were at the website, or yes, they bought this product. So again, we don't know exactly what you're going to want, and we are not suggesting that you keep every piece of data forever, but we are suggesting that it shouldn't be the CDP telling you can't do that. It should be you deciding what to keep and what not to keep. So the CDP has to have the capability. Similarly, the third thing is that it stores the data indefinitely. So that's the persistence in the definition. So again, you can look like a data management platform, often used for customer data, in some ways overlapping with CDPs, often confused with CDPs, but DMPs, data management platforms, typically deal with cookies, and cookies typically last 30 to 60 to 90 days. So they don't keep the data, they actually keep the data for a very short period of time. It's technically persistent because it's stored, but it's not stored forever or even for very long. But we think that to build a lifetime view of your customer, you need to have that data for as long as that customer is a customer. Now, some industries that could be months, some industries that could be decades. But in any event, again, it's up to you as the buyer, as the CDP user, to decide what to keep, not the CDP telling you, we got to throw it away after 90 days. And of course, we have privacy rules nowadays that constrain what we're allowed to keep, but let's not break any laws here. But again, that should not be the CDP telling you what you can or can't do. Then the fourth thing we have is creating the unified profiles. It's kind of a given, but again, not every system does that, even though they might call themselves a CDP, and even though they might deal with customer data for other purposes. So the CDP has to, obviously by definition, build those individual level customer profiles, taking all that data and making it available. And again, not that you're going to store every piece of information and expose every piece of information, but you have to have the capability to pull it all together. And then the final fifth thing to do is share it, again, part of the core definition of access, any system that needs it, because there are many systems, as Stefan said, that actually build a very nice customer profile, but only for their own purpose, and they don't share it out. So the CDP, by definition, is designed to share, usually through an API, sometimes through other techniques, depending on the system. But it has to have the ability to make that data available, because again, so many CDP use cases involve sharing data. We think someone expects to be able to share data when they buy a CDP, so we want to make sure that's part of the definition. And if you meet those 5 things, you get this very stylish little badge there on the left that says, yes, you're a real CDP, and we have an audit process. It's actually not even done by us. There's a third party who does it to ensure objectivity. And they walk through people through this in a very detailed process to earn that badge.
A badge that we're very proud of having, actually. And I think these 5 points here of the checklist, they are extremely important because it summarizes so many things that were so sort of frustrating for a lot of customers that we worked with in the early days, that they couldn't do this. I mean, just the possibility of, okay, so maybe we could ingest data from some sources, not any source, but it was really hard to share that back, the acting part. So it's really good checklist, I would say. All right, thanks, David, for sharing on those points. So just to see that we're on track, please, if you actually can answer yes to this question, please just do that in the chat so we see that we're on track. All right, yes, totally. Thanks. All right. Good, we seem to be on track. All right, moving on. Just look at the time. Yes, we're doing okay. So once we've sort of agreed that we've seen why we need the CDP, we've been talking about the basics, and we understand that there are actually checklist to understand that we are really a real CDP. So then you might ask yourself, so what kind of data can you actually store in a CDP? So let's just look at that. And why do we want to store data at all in a CDP? Well, of course, it's because customers, they expect a one-to-one communication, right? Or at least they want to feel like it's a one-to-one communication, because here you can't have the actual real micro segments of a segment for every customer that you have. That would not be possible. So you have to sort of find relevant segments, not only relevant in the way that it makes sense to communicate to these segments, but also that they are not too large, so you lose track of the relevance, but not too small, so you create a content monster. Because you have to also realize that if you do it this way, you also have to prepare content to the different segments. So this is a fine line, but this is the reason why you need the data, right? So, and then you need to store it so you have a single source of truth. So what data can you actually store? And since we're saying that you should, as a CDP, you should be able to not just connect to some sources, but you should be able to connect to all sources. That means that the variety of data that you can actually store is, of course, quite large. So it's pretty much anything, I would say. And that's what you have to be prepared for. So it's all of the internal data that you actually own by yourself. It's also other data that you might not own, but that you can actually bring into the CDP. And that also means that in the way that it's residing, if it's structured or unstructured, a CDP also needs to be able to handle that. And it also needs to be handled in different ways. Either it's in real time, which is a fact for a lot of e-commerces, for instance, but it also has to be able to handle in different batch ways to ingest that data. And that, of course, what is this actually? So it's click streams, it's social media, it's campaign data, it's customer data, it's all of these kinds of data that you actually find, and that's relevant for you to be able to build your sort of 360 view of your customer, and make it easier for you to be a lot more relevant and a lot more personalized when you communicate with your customer. So how do you actually act on the data? Of course. So the idea of it is that you want to nurture a prospect based on that 360 customer view. So that's basically what you want to do. You want to see that you have as many, and the 360 view, it to me, and maybe this is just me, but it sort of implies that it has to sort of handle a lot of different data points, and that's not the case. A 360 view is what you actually define it. It can be 3 data points, it can be 30, it can be 300 or 3,000. That's not the point here. The point is that it's what you feel is the 360 view of your customer, so you can be as relevant as possible. Now, everybody has a starting point, so I think it's important that you sort of find your starting point and then you grow from that, because the way we see it in the customers that we work with is that you find a starting point, and depending on a little bit where you're at, the maturity of your company, the starting point is a little bit different. But over time, the data points that you actually collect about your customers, they grow. And of course, you get a more richer 360 view of the customer. But that's the starting point, and that's how you want to nurture your prospects. And of course, you need to, once again, you're back to the different touch points, and you probably need some way having a strategy around it and systems to support how you actually communicate. And that depends on your business, I would say. If it's a marketing automation tool that you need to sort of have to be able to handle the omni-channel experience, or if it's just email marketing or whatever. But you definitely need to look into this. I'm flipping over some pages here, going to this, because I know this is always of interest, actually seeing some use cases. So I just want to run through 3 or 4 use cases that we think are, some of them are really good starting points, and we think these use cases also bring quite a lot of value. So one of the, I would say, lower hanging fruits is the using a CDP to actually optimize your marketing spend. And one of the examples that I would like to talk about is one of our customers who do everything through their app, right? Unfortunately, I can't say their name, but anyway, it's they do everything through their app, and it has to do with healthcare. So it's a healthcare app, and of course, it's only used when you actually sort of need it. I mean, it's not like you go into that app unless you need to like find a doctor or find a nurse and need to talk to someone because you actually have an issue that you need to discuss. So it's not like it's an app that you use on a regular basis, probably. Okay, so one of the things that they did was they spent a lot of money on advertising, but we found out that they were also using a lot of that spend on actually targeting their already downloaded those who have already downloaded the app. So what we did was we said, okay, so let's not do that. Let's make sure that every time we get a customer in and who has downloaded the app, we make sure that we do not spend any ads on them. We make sure that we move them to your own owned channels, and that's the way you should be communicating with them. And that was actually a good thing. We saved about I think it was 150 or 200,000 euros per month just by doing that. And it's fairly easy thing to do, but it sort of gives you a really good ROI. So that's optimizing your marketing spend, and using a CDP for that is actually a very low-hanging fruit. Another thing which I think is maybe not a low-hanging fruit, but definitely something that you should look into, and that's churn. As we all know, it costs a lot to find new customers, and then we should do everything we can to keep them. Unfortunately, my experience is that we don't put the effort into it that we should. Usually we have the same churn offering, so to speak, to all customers. One of the things that we did with the largest streaming service here in the Nordics is that we looked into what actually was affecting their churn, and we saw that it was a lot dependent on how the customer was acquired from the beginning, what channel actually that was used and to acquire the customer. That had a lot to do with when and how the customer actually churned. And then we also, of course, saw that depending on who the customer was and their specifics, it was incredibly important what kind of churn prevention actions that we did. And we could also predict when we should be doing these churn prevention actions. And of course, we reduced churn a lot, and that of course has a direct effect on the bottom line. So this is also a really good use case that you should definitely be looking into. And here is of course, you need data from the whole sort of customer journey. It's not enough just to have a portion. You need to understand the whole customer journey here, and to make it really efficient, you need to have data from the whole customer journey, and that has to be collected somewhere, preferably in a CDP. All right. One other thing which I think is important for most retailers is that you definitely have two major touch points, and that is you have depending if you're not just an e-commerce, but if you are a retailer with both an e-commerce and actually real shops, one of the things you definitely need to do is unify the online and offline data. That is extremely important, so you can actually see that the web behavior, maybe you can find that also in the stores, in the sense that the way I do sometimes is I use the cart in the online store as like my list when I actually go into the store. And then if I could sort of get the experience that the shop actually knows that I bought the product in the store, and not keep on retargeting me about the product on social media, that would definitely enhance my customer experience. So this is also a use case that I think is really, really important to look into. And that's it. Those are the use cases that we wanted to present. This is the content. Are there any questions? We would be happy to answer them now, and please use the chat to raise any questions you might have. Or it's crystal clear, and in that case, I would say a job well done to David. And of course, this is not your last chance to actually ask any questions. You can definitely, you see my email there. Please feel free to reach out. And of course, we'll be sending this presentation to you afterwards. And you can connect on LinkedIn as well. Okay, so one question in here. So it's a question for David. How many European CDPs are there? Do you know?
We do know, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. We publish a report every 6 months where we look at all the CDPs that we're aware of. There are about 120 or so. In the latest report, the number keeps growing, and again, bearing in mind our definition of CDPs, which is anybody who does those things. Sort of includes a lot of vendors like Exponia, for example, out of Europe, which is a more personalization platform, but has a CDP. eMarsis comes up. Of course, they were just bought. So if you look at that report, which you can download at cdpinstitute.org under industry update reports, In the library, there's an appendix that lists all the vendors and lists where they are, where they're based. So there's a number, top of my head, and don't hold me, don't, 20, 30, 40, something. It's a substantial portion of the global vendors are actually based in Europe. And then, of course, in addition, we have some of the US-based vendors who work in Europe.
Okay.
How many of those are real? Well, we only count real CDPs. So how many people call themselves CDPs that we wouldn't consider? I honestly don't track that one.
All right. Maybe you can say, is it this, I know that the CDP as a term and maybe as a software has been around a little bit longer in the States, right? And maybe what does it look like worldwide?
What does the number of vendors look like worldwide?
Yeah, and the growth maybe around the world.
Yeah, well, you know what? Let me, as I say, we have all that. I'm pulling up the report as we speak. So again, in the most recent report, which was last July, we had about 120 odd vendors, 121 to be specific. Of those, the number who were in Europe were, we give all these fancy data here. There were, about 40% of that 120, 39% were in Europe. So you can do that math.
Yes.
Yeah. So the growth rate of the industry, it runs, it's growing quite quickly, 30, 50% per year, something like that. COVID caused a bit of a hiccup, as you might have imagined, but a lot of companies accelerated their digital transformation, and that requires a CDP. So actually COVID has been certainly not an entire negative. Some companies, some CDP vendors have actually done quite well as a result.
Absolutely, that's true. We actually see quite the demand actually. There was a short downturn, but now it's picking up really nicely, which is good. All right. So thank you for being with us this afternoon or this morning, David, for you. So thanks a lot, David, that you could join us today.
My pleasure.
And that pretty much winds it up. So thanks for today.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.